Hello, my friends, the people out there that listen to a show that we like to call ADD Masterminds. I don't know what you guys call it. I mean, you could call it Flu. I don't know, but we call it ADD Masterminds.
We are
Okay.
starting so strong. I
Welcome to
can't.
Flu. Oh, that's
Glad
the
to
name
have
of
you
this
on
podcast episode.
the Flu
Welcome to
channel.
Flu.
Perfect.
I
Oh
already,
my
yeah.
God.
All right. I am Bridge Livwat.
I'm the girl representing all of the girls.
All girl kind.
Yep. As I should.
All right. So I think we were gonna open by talking about blurry creatures, and I have no clue what that is. So explain everything about blurry creatures to me.
See, I love to become an instant expert on things, which means I listen to like 4 podcast episodes and I know
Mm,
everything.
mm,
But Blurry Creatures I started listening to, and it's kind of cryptids through like a biblical lens. Like, what could it kind of be? Are there cryptids represented in the Bible? And there's a lot of it is really interesting. They go into the Nephilim, they go into um the Rephaim, which is apparently the Nephilim after the flood, but like a
mm.
lot of how anytime they were like, oh, we can't go conquer these people, they're giants, they're huge, like that they're cryptids, or that they were like
So what are
type of
cryptids?
Bigfoot. Bigfoot, Mothman, Chupacabra,
So like
um,
creatures that may not exist.
may not. There's
Mm,
plenty that people thought didn't exist, and then it turns out that they were real, which is very cool.
mm.
But yeah, cryptid's going to be like the Bigfoot, Loch Ness type, maybe mythological creatures that might be there, might not. I'm a big crazy believer in cryptids, but they're big on, that the Nephilim are actually all over the Bible, these human angel hybrids. So they're very big on the hybrids. The interviews they have are fascinating. The people that have found these enormous skulls, the evidence that has gone missing, like
Ooh.
it's every now and then I'm like, well, that's a little bit out there, but then I feel like who knows anymore. But it's a good show. I think you'd like it.
It's like the good kind of conspiracy theory where it doesn't like lead people to do like dangerous thing that
Right.
endanger people's lives without getting political.
Yeah. It's very much possibly like just the thought experiment of
Yeah.
like, all right, maybe these things were real. Maybe they still are.
I'm
Um,
just gonna assume that like every like freakishly tall person is like an offspring of the Nephilim.
oh, that's a
Yeah.
total, like they still think that the bloodline is around. For some reason, people with red hair, they seem to think still
Oh.
part of that bloodline. So like Prince Harry definitely
Oh.
descended from Nephilim or something like that. Like it's wild. Definitely.
Wild.
Um
Did you
Portals, underground caves, like it's a whole thing.
did you
I
see
saw
like the South Park?
no.
So South Park did an episode. I never watched South Park, but I made an exception. I got one of my
Sure.
kids to figure out how to stream it for me so I
Okay.
could watch the episode on the King and Queen of Canada.
Oh, okay.
Right? And it basically had two characters that were just like Harry and Meghan, but they didn't call them Harry and
Okay.
Meghan.
Sure.
And so they're like, "Oh, it's in my memoir. It's titled Wah."
I read that book.
You
Oh, I read Wah. I
did.
liked it. I did.
Yeah, I think like okay, so I think like the whole royal family thing is like a like to have people grow up with that level of fame, it's
Hmm.
gonna mess up anybody. Um, and I think like to say like, yeah, I didn't like growing up in the royal family. Like that's okay,
Right.
sure, like cool, you have the
Yeah.
right to do that. But to build a whole career around it, I'm like, okay, I don't, like how much do we give like attention to this?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like first of all, like royal family fame is different than like child star fame. So a child star that's just gotten everything they wanted and goes
Yeah.
off the rails is different than, kid who's been basically raised to be a politician.
Yeah.
Um, and I my my takeaway from the book was just him correcting a lot,
Hmm.
that, or at least being able to be like, look, I saw this said and that's not what happened, and I saw this done and that's not what happened, or they treated my sister-in-law this way and my wife that way.
Hmm.
I love not using actual names, but everybody, our
Yeah.
listener, knows exactly who.
Yeah.
um Stuff like that. And then um yeah, just to kind of be like, and it wasn't how you expected. It wasn't exactly this glamorous whatever lifestyle. There's money, but it belongs to the firm, and how the firm and the family are different. And I just, I don't know. I found it fascinating.
Huh.
I
So
I
just kind
liked
of
it.
gives you like an inner look at
Yeah,
what it's
it's
like for that person.
right, and how it's, whatever you thought it was going to be. It's not like a movie. It's not like this. It's not like,
Yeah.
it was. It's different than American Hollywood fame, which I think is what we all over here at least thought, it was for royal family fame.
Well, it's funny too, because like I remember there was like all this criticism that came out for like the whole Imagine thing where they did that whole like
Yeah.
everybody sings Imagine, all these
I
celebrities
got
in
away
there.
with not ever seeing it. I don't know how I
Okay.
didn't see it, but I heard enough about it.
Yeah, I
It
saw
was good.
portions of it.
Okay.
But like I remember just like all the criticism that came out about it. And then I had a friend who at the time who was like kind of plugged into some of these like celebrity, and I was like, man, these people are so out of touch. And my friend is like, no, if you actually know these people, they're just like a friends group that hang out together. And that's
Okay.
just kind of like, it's not, they're not that out of touch. It's just, they just live a different life. And within their bubble,
Right.
it makes sense to be this way.
Yeah. Okay.
And, every time I criticized, a celebrity, he'd be like, hey, I know this person. And like, I don't like you attacking my friends. So I'm like, all right.
Okay. Gosh.
But it is like, I think a lot of times we forget that like famous people are actually humans just like us.
Right.
And so it's like to make someone into a caricature rather
Mm,
than seeing them as a human being. And it's like, and I don't like, they live with far more, advantages than the regular
sure.
person.
Yeah.
And so I like Kevin Bacon. I remember someone who was interviewing him and they're like, man, it must be so hard to be like so famous. Like everywhere you go, like you can't escape the fame. And he's like, are you kidding me? Everywhere I go, strangers walk up to me and say, I love you.
Mm,
People give me free stuff everywhere I go, right?
yeah.
And
Okay.
so it's interesting because I think it comes with a lot of advantages, but then there's a dark side to it too.
Right.
And I think like human beings were not designed to be gods. And
Mm,
so, and they're all gods.
yeah.
And I think it's the same thing that we're doing in the church with pastors. We
I
put
mean,
them
is
on a
anybody
pedestal.
meant to be that known and have that much influence? I don't think that's healthy for anybody. But
Yeah.
I'm probably out of touch for a portion of, the population. We're all conditioned in our little social climates, and um yeah, it's all
Well, for sure.
relative. None of it matters. It's made up.
Well, it's funny because like when I first moved into this place, we live like on like a main road.
Mhm.
It's like there's a lot of traffic. And we woke up in the morning one day and our barbecue, which is in front of our house, the propane tank was missing from it. And my wife is like, I think someone stole our propane tank. And I look out there and my first reaction is I started laughing. I'm like, that's hilarious. Like, how did somebody do that? It's like a main road. Like they just in the middle
Yeah,
of the night, they just walked up and
they were
took
like,
this
"That's
propane tank and didn't think
mine
anyone would
now."
notice and stuff like that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's hilarious. And then I went and bought a new propane tank, right? I was like, okay, I'll just go buy another propane tank. And then I thought about it afterwards and I'm like, this wouldn't be okay for a lot of people. Like there's a lot of people that would be like, oh no, I have to buy another propane tank. This is gonna be bad. Like,
Yeah.
like it's like they can't
Yeah.
afford that. That's the
Yeah.
you know? And so it's like kind of recognizing that there are people who don't live with the same advantages that I have.
Right. Right. I just walked away from a job that was really it was small. It was 2 days a week.
Yeah.
Um, but it was terrible, and I hated every second of it, and I drove in the last day knowing it was my last day. I was like, "I'm not staying. I'm not coming back." Least professional thing I've ever done, I left in the middle of a shift, but I was in my
Oh,
probationary period,
yeah.
so I was
Yeah.
allowed to leave whenever I wanted.
They're probationary too when you're probationary.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
When that clicked over it, I was like, "You know what? He's not passing my probationary period, so I'm out." I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I'm just gonna leave today." And I went home and I was like, I fully grasp the amount of people, and it's most, that would not be able to do that. That would be
Yeah.
like, "No, it's only 2 days a week, but I need these days. I can't find," like, I fully grasp I was able to leave without replacing it, and that was fantastic. But yeah, it's I think, we're all at I'm severely disadvantaged by one standard, but if we look on the other side, I know that we're also severely advantaged on the other side.
Yeah.
That
Well,
that perspective's so important.
yeah, for sure. And it was funny because at work last week, a couple weeks ago, I think it was national we did National Women's Day. And I realized just how many women I work with because
Mhm.
it's like I'm like in the oil industry. I do a lot of work in the
Oh,
oil
sure.
industry, and I've spent a lot of my career like not really working much with women. And
Mm,
I was like, it's kind of cool how much like how many women we have in this organization. And I had a conversation with, my manager, who's a woman, and another lady that was there, and they were talking about like how, when they travel for work, it's like they can't always take a taxi.
mm,
And it's
mhm,
like, yeah, and I'm like, I have never thought of any risk in taking a taxi.
right.
But they
Yeah.
were talking about all these things about like how it's like, especially, if you go to like a party and you're
Mhm.
intoxicated, it's like
Yeah.
you don't take a taxi by yourself. I'm like, wow. Like there's just so many things I'm clueless about
Yep.
because because of the advantages I have. I love how we're not using the P word because it's political.
Right. No, you don't take a taxi, you don't say that you're
Yeah.
going home, you don't say that you're traveling alone, you don't say, "Nobody's home right now," you don't,
Yeah.
like, I've taken very few Ubers, but
Yeah.
I've always like, "Oh, no, I'm going to a friend's house," like, I've never told anybody I'm heading home, like,
Yeah.
just you don't do that. My husband was just out of town for a night or 2 to go to a family funeral, and I love my neighborhood. My neighborhood's absolutely fine, but it was before daylight saving, so it was still pretty dark to walk the dog even like at, like 9 or whatever. And I was like, he was not in town. He was in Texas. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm walking the dog. I'll be back and like I'll text you when I get home. Like make sure
Yeah.
that I get home
Yeah.
just to take him around the block in the dark. But it's all the time. It is constant.
Like another thing that was like immensely shocking to me is like I have this friend who's part of like the um nonprofit
Mhm.
whatever sector. And he was like at this event where this woman received an award, and the guy that was presenting the award is like a guy who's known to be a little handsy.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so he presented the award to her, and then he offered her a hug and gave her a hug.
Yeah.
And my friend said you could see how uncomfortable she was. And he said to me, yeah, because like when women are offered a hug, they're supposed to give a hug.
Mhm.
And I was like, what? Like, no way. Like, I just, and so
Yeah.
like the next day I'm at work, and there's this lady I worked with who's just like, she doesn't take any crap from anyone. Like, she's
Good.
just a no nonsense,
Yeah.
like I was just like, she seems like a tough girl, right? And I asked her, I'm like, so if a guy offered you a hug, would you feel like you have to take it? Otherwise, you'll be labeled by some kind of word that people use for women
Sure, sure.
that's not nice.
Right.
And she's like, yeah. yeah, I'd have to accept the hug. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that's insane. Like
Yep.
and so and so there's like so many things like as a guy, I never think about. And I think, like as a middle class person, I'm sure there's lots of things I don't think about. Right.
Right. Right.
And I mean, even, well, I could even say I have a coworker who is Muslim and he's got like a very Muslim name. Um,
Mm-hmm.
his first name is Muhammad, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, we're going to fly to another city. And he's like, okay, I have to get there like 2 hours early. I'm like, why? Because they have to vet my name.
Oh, stop.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's crazy because
Oh,
his name is
wow.
the same name as somebody who's done some bad stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there's just things like that. And I think like when you have like a common name like that, which is so
Mhm.
interesting in itself too, because I'm like, there's no like Christian equivalent to having a name like Muhammad. Like nobody, like what's a name that's just like
Right.
obviously Christian? Like even the name
Yeah.
Christian, I'm sure there's lots of atheists with the name Christian,
Sure. Sure.
right? And
Yeah.
so
Huh.
it's interesting that he's like just labeled because of his name. And
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, and so I mean there's just a lot of things we don't think about, and just like a little bit of like,
Hmm.
if we're just able to listen to people and let them tell us their story.
Right.
And same thing with my children, I learn a lot from my children about what this next generation is going through. And
Yeah.
like my kids are like, yeah, when we go to like Walmart, there are people that are going to be watching us very carefully
Yes.
because they
Yeah.
think we're going to shoplift. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't remember that at all as a kid.
Yeah.
Maybe I was just
Hmm.
unaware,
It could be,
but it's also they're
but
being raised in the city. Maybe in
yeah.
the city it's more prevalent that they
Okay.
kind of stereotype teenagers and say they're up to no good, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, like, and all of these things, like, I think all of these things develop within our society for various reasons. Like, I'm sure, like, if somebody's going to assume that a teenager is gonna shoplift, it could very well be because teenagers have shoplifted from them in the past, right?
Sure.
So it's like, I don't know if there's much to be done with these stereotypes, but people have to live with
Yeah.
those stereotypes.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. And I just have
Mm.
compassion for people who deal with challenges I don't.
Yeah. I feel
I
like the
mean,
stereotypes come from somewhere.
yeah.
I think there is, and quote profiling, will come from
Hmm.
somewhere, but it doesn't have to stick around. Like it doesn't make it properly based on anything or useful, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, some stereotypes are rooted in some fact,
Right.
and it's still unfair to apply it to someone who is not a shoplifter.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's also stereotypes that arise out of fear where we're
Hmm.
preemptively stereotyping people and saying these type of people, don't trust them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right, and that can be race, that can be other identities that I won't get into because that'll
Sure.
get political. um right, and it's like, and there's all kinds of stereotypes that are being built that have no actual factual basis, and it's just a matter of people with power trying to manipulate people under them. Like anybody
Yeah.
who has some sort of following, it's like there is a good chance that they have developed that following by getting people angry.
Mm.
And so like what
Yeah.
are you making people angry about to get a following?
Ooh, just united through rage.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think maybe to a certain extent I've probably developed a following out of people being enraged about things,
Hmm.
right? Because I do critique the church pretty hard sometimes. And so
That's true.
that could be it too. I'm
Yeah.
probably unfair in how I critique the church sometimes. But I'm just so angry.
As you say with a smile.
Yeah.
I'm just so angry about it. It makes me so mad.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird because I'm like, I guess I was gonna talk about this later, but my therapist pointed out to me that like what I'll do is I won't deal with the person right in front of me.
Hmm.
I'll just rage about it, and then I'll think about what's the system that made them this way. And then I'll rage about that system on social media or on my
Uh,
podcast. And I'm
okay.
not dealing with the person in front of me at all.
Huh.
And I'm like, well, that's such an unhealthy way to create.
Mm.
And my therapist is kind of like, well, like if you decide to build content to educate, that's one thing.
All right.
But to use it instead of actually dealing with real life situations, that's very unhealthy.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And so part of it is like she said, the solution is if you feel a certain way about something, you tell people and
Mm.
don't decide not to tell them because they won't believe you or,
Mm.
they'll react negatively to how you feel.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning this because I don't know. I feel something. I'm like I on Facebook, something happened and I was like, oh, I'm so angry with how that person reacted. But I'm like, but I don't want to tell them that
Mm.
because I
Hmm.
don't think it makes sense for me to be angry. And maybe Facebook isn't the best situation for that because I'm like, I didn't like your tone there.
Mm. Hmm. Right. Right. Right.
But it got me thinking about it and I'm like, huh, that really bothers me. Does it even make sense for that to bother me? And I'm still kind of processing it. I took
Gotcha.
a I took a break for a week off Facebook. I go back to Facebook tomorrow. But
Tomorrow. Hey, I went back to Twitter.
did
Mostly
you?
I did. I haven't done a ton, and it's just mostly it's very true that it was mostly stuff unrelevant that I was like, "Oh, I want to respond to that question."
Uh-huh.
And I don't know how to do it without Twitter. So I just put it back on my phone and um it's still as wild as I thought it would be. I jumped right in the middle of so many, not jumped, but feel like I opened it up and it came in the middle of so many topics and conversations that I was like, I don't even know what we're mad about today. I don't know what this is. So I'm gonna go. I'll come back in the morning and see what happens tomorrow. But
I'm
still wild
trying
out
to
there.
deal with stuff with humor more,
Okay.
and it's just like, okay, this person says something that's just ridiculous. So let's try this out. How
Yeah.
far can we take this? And respond with like, yeah. And then so I'm trying to have fun with some of this ridiculousness,
Okay.
but yeah, I guess learning how to process my emotions because I still don't want to just like, just come out with like, I don't like your tone.
Right.
I
Right.
want to process it a little more than that and just kind of calm down and say, but the problem is if I give myself too much time to calm down, it doesn't even make sense to address it. By the way, a
Right.
week ago, I
Yeah.
didn't like your tone.
It's been eating at me ever since. That's just really interesting with therapy, your therapist that initially I was like, no, considering the system that made somebody
Yeah.
react that way and say what they said makes sense. That seems like the right thing to do. That doesn't seem unhealthy. But then again, if you're not confronting the person with the behavior, then yeah, I guess you gotta do that first.
Well, and I think part
I
of it
miss
too.
therapy. I miss it. I gotta go back.
I got like I'm not I think I'm going a month without therapy and then I'm gonna go back in a couple weeks here.
Mm.
But I think I'm still processing what went down last time. Um but I think like for me the reason why I go straight to the system is that I'm like I want to forgive that person that
Mm.
hurt me.
Okay.
And so I don't want to say, "Hey, that hurt." Because I feel like they're going to react with like, well, no, it's the truth, right? Because that's what I get in
Mhm.
Christian circles most often. What I said is the truth. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, okay, first of all, it's not the truth. And second, you're supposed to speak the truth in love.
right.
And so, like, both, but it's like the overrating their ability to discern truth is the first thing.
Mm.
And so, so I go straight to the system and be like, well, this is how they view God. Like, they view God this way.
Mm.
And, most of it is kind of like they believe God is manipulative. And so it's like God makes us do the things we're supposed to do. And God has this idea of what's right and wrong
Right.
that doesn't make sense to us humans.
Mm.
And so it's like, okay. So then it becomes like gaslighting because it's like, well, I know you feel this way, but that doesn't matter because God hates it when you're
Right.
this way.
Right.
And so you need to get aligned with God. And the people that are saying this are like just nasty people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is it this way? And I think it is this way because they see God as manipulative,
Hmm.
where I see God as love and
Yeah.
it's non coercive love. And so it's like,
Yeah.
and so then your theology kind of aligns with the idea of consent. And it's like,
Mm.
is this consensual? Which kind of flies in the face of like all of this
Yes.
Christianity.
Yes.
And so that's where I'm at. And I'm like, well, I like this better.
Right.
Is this
That's
scriptural? I'm like, I don't
that's a
totally
tough
know.
one. Yeah.
But if this is scriptural and this is right, I'm like, I'm still okay with being wrong because
Mm.
I want to let people live their lives. And I want love to be the answer to everything.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to stake everything on that, including my own salvation. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't think God's going to fault me for pursuing love.
Yeah. I feel like too many people open their mouths on how God feels about things that he hasn't
Yeah.
told us how he feels about.
Yeah.
He's told us what he abhors. And most of the time it's not what, the Twitterverse is mad about. And I don't know. The obsession with Paul's writings, I get it, and the scripture is
Yeah.
valid and we need it. And I just get very like, ugh. If I was some like shepherdess back in the day and Jesus walked by and was like, daughter, you're loved, sister, you're
Mm,
forgiven, like whatever,
yeah.
and walked away, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think the Messiah just came by, that would be enough forever. Like
Yeah.
that, if I never read any of these other letters, if I never found people who also met him, if I met him
Yeah.
and that was it, that would be enough forever. So I just I just really want to focus on what he would have said to me, what he did say,
Yeah.
and the relationship between me and him, and not necessarily letters that were written to specific churches going through specific things. I think it's all
Yeah.
important. We can learn from it all. But I still, like 2 years ago, and my internet life needs to not be my real life, but like 2 years ago, somebody was like, well, what makes you think that what Jesus said is more important than what Paul wrote? And I was like, oh, we're not continuing this conversation another second, not a
Yeah.
second. Um,
Yeah.
one of the podcasts I've been listening to is reading through the entire gospels every month. And my attention span is so short. I cannot sit and read. But it's the first thing I do every morning, and every morning I'm like, "Ugh, I want to do something else first." It's 15 to 20 minutes, and it's a different translation every month, and it's like a different order every month. So it went
Huh.
through one way, it went through another, and this month it's chronological. So there's a lot of repetition in a day because there's a lot of like this miracle is in all four, or this parable is in all four, and the differences and the details that each author comes up with. Like today, apparently John wasn't in it at all, but Matthew and Mark and Luke were. But it's
Yeah.
fascinating. We're wrapping up month 3 of just reading the Gospels, the whole 4 books every month. And I'm like, if I did nothing but this for the rest of my life as Bible, that'd be fine. Let's just do this. Like Jesus was so cool. Let's
Yeah.
just read these.
I am trying to do the Bible chronologically.
Oh,
So
yes.
what I've been doing in like the app, the Bible app, whatever it is, U version, is every time I get to the next like book that I'm supposed to study, I just find a book study that's on it. So I'm in
Okay,
Ruth right now.
yeah. Yes.
But the one I did last was like so like I could tell this guy was like just fiercely political.
Oh, okay.
in how he was addressing it. It's like God's way. God's way
Okay.
is the right way. And I'm like, and and so it was kind of interesting because I was like, I could just feel the judgment in the commentary
Mm,
every time. And I'm just like, I am not loving this, but it's
yeah.
okay. I got through it.
No, I love going through it chronologically. It makes things make more sense, and the Bible characters, for lack of a better word, that
Yeah.
were contemporaries but were separate. Like I can't remember who it was, but there was something that were like, did you know this one and this one were actually interacting with God in these huge stories at the same time, but totally separate, but
Hmm.
at the same time contemporarily. And I was just like, nope, I had no clue that that was a thing. Just it opens up how small the world was at the time, I guess.
Yeah, and my relationship with scripture has changed a lot over time
Okay.
too.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, and so I'm not sure what to do with it sometimes. And
Mm,
so like it's interesting. And I think like trying to figure out where I stand on things because it is kind of like I see such like the negative way that a lot of these scriptures have been used.
yeah.
And it's like, and just I don't know, this like ever loving God that's been with me
Mm,
as from childhood.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, and as I've wandered, as I've questioned, and he's still been present with me.
Mm,
And there was never a point where he's like, okay, you're off the rails now.
right.
And I'm done with you. Like it was
Huh.
like even when I was like, okay, you know what? I'm done with you, God.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, well, I'll be here if you want to
Mm,
come back. And I could just sense
yeah.
that. Even in my rage, I was just like, okay. And now it's like I've come back to this just this knowledge, and this understanding that that presence has been with me all this time, just this steady
Mm,
presence and this unconditional love. And it's to the point too where I feel like I relate to the Father more than I do the Son sometimes.
oh,
Because
interesting.
there are scriptures where the Son, I'm
Mm,
like, I don't know if I agree with what you said here,
hmm. Okay.
And so yeah. And so it's just I'm at an interesting place. And so like even with scripture, it's like I can look at scripture and say, okay, well, they said God did this. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know how this relates to the God that I know.
Mm,
Um, because like it doesn't make sense to, for all this death or
sure.
to look at women as property. Like
Right.
there's a lot of things because like even you talk about like David and Bathsheba, there's
Hmm.
that debate keeps coming up all the
Yeah.
time. And it's like people are like, well, it's clear that David raped Bathsheba. And it's like, well, then why doesn't the Bible say that? And it's like, well, they both sinned, and that Bathsheba, shouldn't have been bathing.
Right.
She was not being decent or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know about all that. Like, you
Hmm.
guys can fight about that all you want, but the way that I see it is in the Old Testament, women are viewed as property. And
Yeah.
the Old Testament says David took Uriah's
Yeah.
property.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you really want to just like
I
interpret
mean, I
that
think
Bible that way,
Nathan, uh, it's Prophet Nathan, right, in that one, could not have been clearer
yeah,
that, that a lamb, the picture of biblical innocence
yeah,
was stolen and killed.
yeah,
Um, oh gosh, but no, the God that's been with you since childhood, I love that. Like,
mm,
because you guys have history. And then there's this like, oh, now I'm like, well, God and I have history as
yeah,
friends and everything, that it's like, okay, we have that lifelong history together. Everybody has their own story. We're all
yeah,
like, when you meet a friend of your friend and you're hearing tales out of school, it's almost like, well, God has a history before either of us as well with other people.
yeah,
So are we kind of hearing the like, oh, well, when God and I were hanging out,
yeah,
we did this. When God and I were hanging
yeah,
out, he stilled some storms and he fed us
yeah.
from heaven.
That's
Like,
what the Bible is. It's just like people are
yeah.
like, well, this is what happened with God and I. And like some of us, some of these stories, I'm like,
Can
well,
somebody make that translation? Because I will read the heck out of that. Of like, God around the campfire. Like, well, when
yeah,
God and I went on an adventure,
yeah,
knocked some walls down and It
Yeah.
got bloody in places, but oh my gosh. Oh, I love that.
I'm pretty sure he was cool with me killing those people.
Right. Right.
And it's like, and it's interesting too, because a lot of people interpret those as like, oh, well, back in the Old Testament, people
Mm,
used hyperbole all the time and all this stuff.
sure.
But it's like, I think like the biblical lens is a product of its time. And you have
Yeah.
to kind of understand that time if you really want to like understand what it's saying.
Yeah.
Because like even, like Paul saying, I do not permit a woman to speak in church.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, um, I've heard people say that one way of looking at it is that he was actually quoting somebody else. He wasn't like
Yes.
that was in
Yes. That's
quotations, and
right.
he was kind of
That's
like
right.
mocking them
I've
for
seen
saying
that.
that and all this stuff. And I'm like, it's just so funny to me though that like you're trying to restrict people based on a conversation you heard in a letter
Mm-hmm.
that you took out of context. And I'm like, this is so dumb. Like, can we just like stop and say, does this make sense?
Yes. You're right.
It's like you hear
You know,
Beth Moore speak and you're a man and what she's saying really resonates with you.
yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
If that resonates with the God that you've known since childhood,
Oof,
then take it. Like,
yeah.
and anyways, okay. So you said something that was so cool when we were like done last episode. You said don't
That's
fill
always
in
when
the
I say my cool
blanks.
stuff.
And you were talking
Yes.
about how
Still.
like, yeah, in relationships, we often fill in the
Yeah.
blanks.
Yeah.
Um, where like we're like, well, this person said this. And then
Mm-hmm.
you fill in the blanks of what else they could have been
Right.
thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in a situation that things were a little tense, and it was a lot of texts back and forth, and it was kind of agreed on like, all right, when you're feeling better, person is when I'm feeling better. We're not doing well. It was just, we'll talk about it then. And I was like, okay, I'm ready when you are, and I love you, and I'm like the second you tell me that you're ready to have this conversation, absolutely. And it was so hard for me to just go like, and then that's it. And we will talk when we're ready. And I just kept being like, I bet they're on, they had blocked me on one or two socials over the day. And I was like, I bet they're vague booking right now. And I bet they're talking to their family or friends of ours or something. And they're probably on the phone with their therapist too. And they're saying this
Yeah.
and they're saying that. Like, what um, are they mad about me? Are they building this story up? Because I fully felt and still do that I was in more or less the right. And I don't think there was a wrong. I think there was a right and a hurt.
Hmm.
And that happens. But I just kept I just kept looking at the last like two texts of like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm ready when you are. I love you and we'll talk when you're ready to talk about it. And it's like they could be doing all these other things and talking to all these other people, but that's not my business.
Hmm.
Like it doesn't involve me really. And I got to not fill in the blanks of who they're talking to, what they're talking about, what they're saying. And just this is what I know is true. I'm going to take them at their word. This is the words that are actually in front of me. I have to trust that. And I'm not going to fill in the blanks of what else they're doing, how they're hyping themselves up. And it's been tough. Um, that was like over the summer, but using that, it's helped me so much. Like,
Yeah.
and as an overthinker, as an Enneagram 4 of
Mm-hmm.
just constantly overthinking, what do people think about me and what are they saying and did I come across the wrong way? Did I say the wrong thing? And it's just kind of been like, all right, maybe I did and maybe I didn't, but I can't make up more situations. I can't lay here and think about it. It's not going to help. And I've been telling the kids even, that Ryan, my boy is like, well, this one was my friend last week and now he's not my friend this week. And he said this and he said that. And I was like, well, his opinion of you honestly isn't even your business. And it says
Mm-hmm.
more about him
Mm-hmm.
than you. So don't worry about that.
Yeah.
But, if his behavior's changed and you asked him and there's no reason why his behavior changed and he's not telling you that something happened, then don't make something up. Don't
Mm.
Don't, you got a better
Yeah.
grade or you have a whatever. Who cares? Like just try to let that go. But it's been like the most useful thing of just no, somebody told me this and I'm gonna go with that instead of filling in the blanks and making something up.
Wow. Yeah, I know for me, it's like back in, I want to say 2016, I read this book, The Road to Character by, I think it's Albert Brooks, one of the Brooks. And
Okay.
he talks about all these like historical figures. Um, George H. Bush, I think,
Hmm.
Eisenhower, um, yeah, a bunch of people. I don't think they were all presidents, but like, anyways, he talked about how the greatest generation, they kind of said, like, don't talk about yourself.
Yeah.
And like George H. Bush, when he wrote a speech, his mom would always be saying, George, don't talk about yourself.
Right.
And so if he ever did a speech where it said I in it, his mom would
Mm,
call him up and say, hey, George, you were talking
that's
about
great.
yourself.
Yeah.
And so I thought that's such a beautiful concept, like just not talking about yourself ever. And that kind of morphed into, like, for me, um kind of assuming that people don't talk about me. I'm living my
Mm,
life as if people don't
yeah.
talk about me. Like, I just
Yeah.
like, you know what? Like, I want to represent, you know, my identity well
Right.
as a, you know, Christian, as a
Mm,
man, as a person with this tone of skin. Like, it's like I want to be the best version of all those things.
yeah.
Um and like if people challenge me on that and say, you're not a real Christian, it's like,
Mm,
that's okay. Like, you can think that. I
yeah.
don't care. Like, I'm not worried about pleasing those people. Um like I'm not really, I don't view myself as a people pleaser. Maybe I am. I don't think about it that way.
Okay.
I just want the people around me to have a better experience. I want them to have a good life.
Hmm.
And so I will work at trying to make things better for people around me.
Okay.
And that's true in everything I do, like everything I create. It's like, how can I make things better for people?
Okay.
And so, and I mean, the side benefit is that, yeah, like generally people like me and like being around me, and that's
Mm,
cool. Um, and so, yeah, I don't really assume, like, I don't know of anybody really talking about me negatively behind my back.
yeah.
I just assume they don't talk about me, and that's kind of how I live my
I mean,
life.
isn't it kind of egotistical to be like, everybody's talking about me, they're
Yeah.
talking crap and whatever. And
Yeah.
I just like years and years, I mean, I was a preteen. It was some fashion show, honestly. It was probably what not to wear. I don't even know. But somebody they had dressed her in like literally a trash bag.
Yeah.
And they were like, "No, you need to go in the mirror and we're going to learn this mantra of I can't control how I am perceived. I can only control how I am presented."
Mm.
And I was like probably 12 and like I'm writing that down forever and I just look how you perceive me is none of my business, but how I present myself is. And then, coupled with that, like years and years ago I saw somebody that I hadn't seen in a while, but I ended up seeing her a couple of times and like to me, she always looked the same, but every now and then she'd be like, "Oh no, I'm such a mess today. My hair, my skin, my whatever." And I was like, I didn't notice a difference. So I don't know why I every morning I'm like, oh gosh, I'm down from yesterday. I was better looking yesterday. Maybe I'll be better looking tomorrow. Like just those little fluctuations and like bad hair day and like, and that's all superficial anyway. But
Yeah.
that I was like, no, I saw her 5 times this week, out of nowhere, and I didn't notice any differences, but she definitely was very
Yeah.
aware that there was one day she looked better than another, and I was
Yeah.
like, "If I'm not perceiving this, why would I think that somebody else is, like, really like, 'Huh, you looked really different last time,' or, "Didn't get a lot of sleep, huh?"
Yeah.
It's 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 all weird ego in the end.
It is. And I think that's also like kind of a gender difference too, because I
Mm,
think like with women, there seems to be a lot more fixation on
okay.
you need to look a certain way. Um, And as a guy, if I care too much about how I look, that's weird.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Maybe especially the way I was raised.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
it's like the moment I looked in the mirror, I felt like it was like, what are you, a girl? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. And so, like, it's funny as I got, into adulthood and started to realize I can be my own version of masculinity. It's like I
Sure.
can care about what I wear.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess, like, yeah, I think more than anything, I just dress for what I don't like. I like this hat. I think this hat is cool.
It's a cool hat.
And it's like, and it's funny because it's like I embrace, a certain aesthetic. And, once in a while people would be like, that hat is so cool. It's like a retro Canucks hat. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, I actually was gonna joke about it. I don't remember if I joked about this on Twitter, but I was just kind of like, I think I know what it's like to be a hot girl. Cause like I go around with this hat and I'm like, hey guys, my eyes are down here. Okay.
For your hat. That's great.
But
Yes, very much. That's the same thing.
very much the same thing. But yeah, I don't know. Like I think a lot about like photos when you have a group
Mm,
photo
yeah.
and how there's so many people that and I think I used to be this way like way back. I'm like, man, I look like garbage in that photo and I'm so angry that they posted that photo and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to realize that in that group photo, every person that's in that photo is like, I look like garbage there. And you realize that nobody's actually looking at me.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Everyone's looking at the group photo. They're not going
Yeah.
to single out me and say,
Right.
he looks like garbage. Right. And it's like this
It's
group
nine
photo.
people in a pile of trash. Why did you take that picture? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like this, like the group photo kind of thing, I think is symbolic of
Hmm.
what it's like to just be, to live in your day to day. And
Hmm.
it's like, wow, I look really like whatever. And it's like, yeah, but no one's singling you out. I think even that's true about my behavior. It's like I was in that meeting. Oh, I said that dumb thing. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, but like you're in a group photo. It's nicely diluted so that
Mm.
everyone's going to kind of forget all those little things that you think matter.
Yeah.
Because in the end, you're just part of a group photo. And overall, people are going to look at it and say, oh, that's a bunch of people.
That's all life is. Just one big group photo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. It's
And I,
true because I would look at pictures and I would be like, no, that she looks good and he looks good. That's what they look like. But I'm the one who looks like trash. And I think we would all pick up the group photo and pick out ourselves as the trash. Oh my gosh.
And if none
Yeah,
of us are in the group photo, we just look at the group photo and be like, oh, that's a bunch of
there's
people.
some people. Yeah.
You're still not
Hope
really singling
hope they
anyone out.
had
You're never
fun.
singled
Yeah.
out. You're the only person that's singling yourself out.
Ugh,
And
yeah.
at some level, that's like egotistical to single yourself out all the time.
Yeah.
And and I know like for me too, like I'm realizing, and maybe podcasting has helped me with this too. Um, I don't like sometimes I'll be like, oh man, I probably shouldn't have said that way. But then I'll listen to the podcast afterwards and I'll be like, no, I came off okay.
Yeah.
Like always, like pretty much always. There's never been a time where I'm like, I need to cut that because I sound
Hmm.
stupid or I'm being a jerk or whatever.
Right.
And like I'm realizing like when I have like a conversation and things go sideways, I just have this sense of, oh, well, that's the way it was supposed to go. I
Yeah.
don't do a
Yeah.
whole lot of like rethinking. Like, and I mean, it's
Good.
good to like say, okay, next time I'm not going to say that because that totally set her off,
Sure.
and it's like, I'm not going to do that again. But I mean, like to say, I want to go back and I want to edit that out. It's like, no, no, no. That's
Mm.
the way it was supposed to be.
Okay. Yeah, it happened.
And so I think like, it's like, and I think it's like, what am I cultivating right now? Like, what am I cultivating in my, in the way I present myself?
Mm.
And what's the goal in that? And I think like for me, if I keep that as I just want life to be a little better for other people,
Yeah.
I'm really gonna have no regrets. Even if
Ooh.
I'm misguided and it's like, ooh,
Yeah.
they didn't like that. And it's like, okay, well, I learned from that now. And I'm not gonna do that
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah, as
think
long as you learn from it.
the God that I've been with since childhood
Uh,
is pleased with that.
yeah.
And
Uh,
I think what's been really interesting is like as a father,
mm,
and having 3 children, and the way that I love my children, the way that I care about my children, the way that I understand their struggles.
yeah.
And I'm just kind of like, okay, well, they're struggling with this concept of God right now. Am I angry at them? I'm like, no, I totally
Mm,
understand why they're struggling with the concept of God.
yeah.
So is God angry at them? And I'm like, well, God's more loving than I am.
Mm.
So I'm
Ah.
like, wow, that's really cool. Cause I'm like, this is,
Ooh.
if I'm able to be understanding, it's like, how much more would be a more loving God? How much more understanding would a more loving God? And I think what's interesting is that I'm like, I used to like think that atheists were just like these horrible people.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
I look at atheists and I'm like, I get it. And I think God gets it too.
Honestly, his PR sucks, so he must know. I'm not saying that he writes it all off. Don't, our listener can't come for me. But the yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
The especially, intelligently this like, no, I just really don't see the evidence for it. And so there, but yeah, I definitely was like grown up, raised so very much in the church that I assumed, I don't, or was possibly taught that atheists just cannot have morals,
Mhm.
and that they must be like miserable, hopeless, and
Yeah.
just so incredibly evil. And some of my very best friends are agnostic at best, but
Yeah.
probably more atheist, and just they're good people whose morals are based on doing good to the other humans that are around them, and they're doing a good job.
At some level, like I feel like love is beckoning us all.
Mm,
And so like I know people who have no faith in God or are agnostic, and it's like love is beckoning them.
yeah.
And it's like maybe they actually believe in God, but they don't know it. And I feel like religion has created a different version of God that gets people away from love because they believe that this definition
Mm,
of love aligns with this coercion and this kind of like almost like OCD where it's like, oh, I don't like it when you do that. Don't do that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's like, and that's their whole concept of God, where it's like, there's a lot of punishment involved for not
Mm,
following those OCD things. And I'm like, I don't think that's it. Like, I
yeah.
think that it's like, it's love. Are you pursuing love? And I mean, that opens us up to a lot of things if we just pursue love. And I think there's a lot of fear
Mm,
that just love will lead us in some really bad directions.
yeah.
But I'm like, the more I think about it, like, I'm like, I don't think what we need is love. And so, like, when we talk about like church discipline is a topic I wanted to get into because I was just listening to
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Vox podcast and they were talking about church discipline. And
Ooh, yeah.
it's kind of interesting to me because I'm like, what I see coming out of the church is that there's a lot of people who are abused in different ways and they're not believed.
Mm,
And it's kind of like, well, because they're trying to tear down this ministry by
yeah.
giving false accusations of abuse. And then if they actually do believe the victims, they're like, okay, but how do we restore this leader?
Mhm.
And it's like there's a pretty quick, like it's short circuiting a lot of things. So like within secular
Mm,
culture, it's
okay.
like that leader, we're going to cancel them,
Right.
which is kind of funny because there's been a few instances now where people were supposedly canceled and they come back with like a Grammy where they talked about the whole thing they did to get canceled and they win a Grammy award over it. So I'm like, these people are coming back. Um,
Mhm.
but like at some level, I think that like if you abuse a platform, um, I don't know if you should get that platform back. I mean, there's a lot of things to do with your life.
Yeah.
Do you have to have the same exact platform that you
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
damage other human beings? Like
Yeah.
it's not like we're like taking away everything. We're just
Yeah.
taking away this position of privilege this position of advantage
There we
that
go.
you were sitting
Okay.
in, right? And so like I think that like I understand restoration, but I think that restoration is like restoration to the community. It's like, okay, so it's almost like living in a communal longhouse. Let's say it's like almost like
Mm,
the indigenous culture. You live in this longhouse, and it's like, okay, you know what? You're a danger to the rest of us. We're kicking you
mm,
out of the longhouse. And then it's like, okay, let's work on that. We'll do restorative justice. We'll work
yeah.
with you and say like, are we able to rehabilitate you to the point where it's safe to have you in the longhouse again?
Mm, I like this.
And so it's like, yeah. And I mean, like, do we make you one of the elders again? It's like, I don't know.
Right.
Like just
Right.
restore them to the longhouse
Yeah.
and say it's now safe for you to be in community with us again. But we had to
Yeah.
take a moment where we had to kind of isolate you
Hmm.
because you were harming other people.
Yeah.
And I think that like
Mm.
if we are going to set up church discipline in such a way that we're actually fostering a community that's actually better than the outside world,
Yeah.
we're going to have to figure out a better way to um, do that restoration, because
Yeah.
as is, we're short circuiting the process for the victims getting any sort of justice.
Mm.
And it's something that I
Huh.
sense is being done better in the outside world right now. And
I
I
think
know a lot
so.
of people would object to the fact that, cancel culture exists and all this stuff and that we deplatform people and stuff like that. But I do think that at some level, deplatforming should happen.
Yeah.
And there should actually be a process, though. It shouldn't just be a crowd deciding we're going to deplatform this person and that's how it works.
Right.
I
Right.
don't think mob justice is the best thing, but I think like having a process where we're actually, yeah, you should be deplatformed.
Yeah.
And then we figure out what restoration looks like. And
You
maybe,
can come back to community, but not to power.
yeah,
Those have to be two different things. I think it actually it was on they were playing a game on Relevant, and it was name three things, blah blah blah, but the topic was three pastors who have had to step down from their positions at their churches because of, abusive allegations or whatever. And everybody, like, the names in my head, I was like, oh, just flying out.
yeah,
Or at least, like, I can think of the churches, I can think of the whatever, but everybody's so quick to just, but he's a man of God and he was doing good and we have to bring him back. But especially when it's actual abuse of power, um, you can't put somebody back on that throne, give them a microphone right away. But then I'm like, I can remember the 90s, and I can remember um some female musicians who had personal failings,
yeah,
who were supposed to never ever have a career again and never be forgiven again. And speaking to men about this, who were just like, no, she should never make another album, she should never, like, we should sing her songs anymore, we shouldn't hear her, like, she can't ever have a ministry again, absolutely not. And I while I probably agreed at the time because of my raising, I know that I also was kind of like, but that's just it. Like, there's no forgiveness for a personal moral failing like that. There's no coming back from that ever. But we're really ready to forgive abuses and put
yeah,
people back in pulpits. But
yeah,
we're just, I don't know if this is a gender thing. It was, at least back then, we were really ready to, like, oh, she cheated on somebody and then marry the guy that she cheated with. She's done. She can't
yeah.
have anything. And I've totally lost the thread of my point, but I don't know. I've seen, like, the two of them were like, okay, so we'll go, like, yes, it was wrong, but because they're in the ministry and they really do love the Lord, we have to be okay with it and let them back in and let them do the work for the sake of the kingdom. But this lady can't sing songs anymore. Like, and I don't know.
I think
That
it's
comes up
like,
in my head, that duplicity.
I think it really stems from like valuing covenant over consent.
Okay.
And so like you've made a covenant before God.
Yeah. All right.
Um and that's again kind of that overruling God who is OCD and coercive. And it
OCD. Yeah.
yeah, and maybe I'm totally missing you using a psychological term.
I mean,
But it's
it paints a good picture at the very least.
yeah, I'm not diagnosing that God with OCD officially, but it's like
Officially.
he's got particularities that
Yeah.
people are trying to adhere to. And so when he calls a man to ministry,
Hmm.
right? Who can come against that?
Right.
And so that covenant, there's that covenant that's more
Mhm.
important than anything else. And consent is completely forgotten because even God himself is not consensual.
Yeah.
You know, he forced Jonah to go preach, right?
Yeah.
Jonah was like, no. And then it was like, put him in the belly of a whale. So
Yeah.
Jonah always had a choice, but like he made
Right.
life really hard,
Right,
like
but we would
impossibly hard
totally
for
call
Jonah.
that coercive and be like, "No, he agreed under duress." That's
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Ooh.
yeah, and so like all of that kind of picture of God, if we see God that way and covenant is more important than anything else, then we're going to okay a lot of things that
Yeah.
in the outside world are not okay.
Yeah.
And the outside world, we're very quick to say, no, that guy should not be a politician anymore. He
Mhm.
hurt these people. We're going to deplatform him, right?
Yeah.
And and the outside world, they're fixated with consent.
Mhm.
Consent is everything. And people can consent to all kinds of weird things in the outside world that the church
Sure.
is like, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do
Right.
that. Right. And then the church feels superior to the outside world because they don't allow consent for all those weird
Mm. Mhm.
kinks, for lack of better terms. Right. And
Yeah.
so the kind of OCD church is
Mhm.
like, oh, we don't allow any of those things. So we're better.
Yeah.
And then when accusations come forward, it's like, oh, you guys are being like the world here, and you're trying to tear down this man
Yeah.
of God. God chose him. He's got a covenant with God, right? And so they're always trying to establish that. And I think it's the same thing when you talk about David, and it's like, did David
Yeah.
rape rape Bathsheba? And it's like, how dare you guys accuse a man of God? Like he's a
Mhm.
man after God's own heart.
Right.
And I saw like a secular kind of critique of David and saying, the Bible says David was a man after God's own heart. Let's
Mm.
list all the things he did. And I'm like, ooh, that doesn't look good.
Right.
Like
Right.
he reminds me of a lot of the worst politicians I've ever
Yes.
seen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if I like that David was considered a man after God's own heart. And I
Mm.
understand that, like, oh, but forgiveness. And that's the great thing about Christianity is forgiveness. But
Mm.
again, with that OCD God, it's like, he's like, okay, I forgive the abuser and I let them continue to abuse. Like
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
what's so messed up about it. So it's like, okay, so if I get away from the OCD God and I get with the God who is love,
Mm.
it talks about love God, love others. And we always
Right.
think of love God first, then love others.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, okay, well, if God is love, love, and then
Mm.
love others.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so I'm loving love. Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's like this perfect love. And I then love others out of that. And so instead of having kind of like love with an asterisk
Yeah.
from the OCD God, where it's like these are the terms and conditions that apply to love,
Yeah.
and has a lot of tough love, where it's kind of like, I know this really hurts you, but it is actually love.
Right.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
I know this is making you suicidal, but it's actually love.
Right. Yeah.
But if we love and love others, loving love means that I'm actually going to listen to you. And this is going to be a consensual situation where I can hear you out. And you can say things like, I don't believe in God. And it's like, it's okay. I get it.
Yeah.
God gets
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, let's see where this goes. Right. And it's like, and I guess I am past this idea that I have to sell a brand.
Mm,
And I'm just like, I'm just going to love people and encourage people to love. And I believe that God is love. That's where we're all going to get there.
yeah.
Ooh, that's very universalist. But you know what? I'm unashamed of that.
Rob Bell would be very proud.
I think God's big enough to accept everyone.
Yeah.
And I think it's unfortunate that we have theologies that really divide people and
Yeah.
make things so impossible for people and make the whole church so impossible for people that it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, you guys can have that.
Yeah. I mean, I was fully embarrassed. I mean, this is broader, but um like I don't know, I was hanging out with friends who were, Catholic, and then there was like well, this one's a Lutheran church and then this one's like Methodist, and there was a lot of like, are they not like what is the big difference? Like they're Christian churches, right? It's like, yes, but there's like all these reasons that these guys are a little different from each other, and then these guys are very different from each other, and they all come from really, some of them are really stupid reasons. And it was genuinely embarrassing that these differences, mean a lot to some people. And I was like, okay, I can't even explain it. I go to a Lutheran Brethren church, which apparently has like 200 buildings in the whole country. It sounds like we're Quakers. We're not. But then I'm like, no, that one's a Lutheran evangelical church. I don't know why that's different. And that one's this one. And we all kind of jumped off of Catholicism, which comes from here. And it was just wild, like the division of whatever. And I was like, but at their core, all these little buildings believe in Jesus. They just have these differences of opinions on other things, and that made
Yeah.
them go worship separately,
Yeah.
and probably for reasons that are not that important. But it was genuinely like, there are differences, and sometimes it's important, but it's just silly, like you like to say, it's just silly.
It's silly. And I think like people take their theology so seriously.
Yeah.
And like for me, it's kind of like I adopt a theology that makes me a better human being. And
Mm,
maybe I'm not getting it right,
yeah.
but forgive me, but I just don't care. I just want to be a better person.
Yeah.
And so I kind of look at it, I'm like, okay, well, if we look at David and Bathsheba, I'm like, if you refuse to believe that David could possibly have raped Bathsheba, you're the type of person that will not believe someone when they
Yeah.
say that they're being abused.
Yeah.
I don't like that theology.
No.
And I mean, maybe the opposite theology could be problematic. I don't know. I don't
Mm,
really care. Like I'm like that's a long time ago. I just
yeah.
don't like the
Yeah.
type of person that you become when you believe a very strict interpretation on that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm like, my interpretation is that the Bible in the Old Testament, women were seen as property and David stole Uriah's property.
Mm,
And I'm like, that's what I think the Bible is saying. I
okay.
think that like looking at it as David probably raped Bathsheba because how would she say no to the queen is a great theology
Mm,
because it helps you actually understand that there are people who have power and advantages and they take advantage of other people.
yeah.
And we need to be aware of that. And as Christians, we should stand up for those people who are being taken advantage of. So I
Mm,
think that's a great theology. I don't think the Bible's trying to say that that's what happened.
yeah.
Realistically, I think it's what happened. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these, but I'm like, I like a lot of this is like we're trying to make the Bible say things,
Mhm.
and those people who think they have a strict interpretation of the Bible will not acknowledge
Mm,
that women were property. David stole Uriah's
yeah.
property.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think that's the plain text reading of it. You guys
Yeah.
don't want to acknowledge it because you don't want to acknowledge that the Bible was okay with women being property. But I
Right.
think it's pretty clear. Like, it's like you take that land and those women, try them
Mm-hmm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're happy with them, you get to keep them as your property.
Yep.
I mean, the plain text reading, that's what I see. I don't know. And so I'm like, we've progressed past that and we don't want to see things that way. And I'm glad that people aren't holding to that theology
Mm-hmm.
because that kind of theology makes you a bad person.
Yeah.
And so everyone's doing it. We're all picking and choosing our theology. So I'm going to pick and choose it so that I can be the best person possible.
Yeah.
So I can embrace love in better ways.
I'm down. I like it.
Yeah. Which I'm sure is very heretical for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But like, honestly, I think that it's just self-deceit. Like, to be like, no, I'm totally biblical and everything. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
I know what your interpretations on all this stuff is. Like, you literally are not telling women to not speak in the church ever.
Right.
So you guys are soft on that. You're not entirely biblical on that.
Right.
And then this whole like, well, what qualifies as a pastor? Only a man can qualify as a pastor. I'm like, is the word pastor even in the Bible?
I mean, it's got to be in some translation somewhere, some
Maybe,
English translation.
but
I don't
it's
think
all just
Jesus
so
ever said
silly.
pastor, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, like, to me, it's like, you know, I like how Paul was like, what does it matter as long as the gospel's being preached?
Yeah.
It's just kind of
Yeah.
like, well, are people encouraging each other to love is still the way I want to take it. And like, that's just my simplistic way of looking at all of faith is drop the brands. Let's just love each other.
Yep.
And like, is this leading to love? Is this conversation leading to love? And I'm like, well, then great. I don't care who's talking.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
All right.
Well, this was fun.
This was absolutely fun. I'm glad it's been a bit.
Yeah.
Good one.
Well, have a good month, everybody. We'll be back in a month, probably.
Probably.
Bye.
Air Smudge.